So it's almost time to cut open my made in England pair of Doc Martens. But before we do that, I wanted to do this video on just some basic leather information and like leather 101 so that you guys can have this base of information to go off of when we're talking about leather quality, whether it's like the type of leather or the thickness or the cut of the leather. You'll know what I'm talking about, or if you don't, you can refer back to this video and kind of make some more educated choices when it comes to leather products. And I'm also gonna do this as kind of like a two-part video where if I didn't cover what you wanted to hear, or if you have a more specific question about a certain type of leather or anything, comment it below, and then I'll kind of gather the most liked comments or most commented on comments and do a little Q&A and answer all those questions. So if you do have a specific question about leather that's not covered in this video, comment them below and I'll get to them when we do the second half of this video. And also if you want to like and subscribe, that'll help too. No pressure though. So the two main and most common ways you're gonna see leather is tanned, or you're gonna hear it talked about, is vegetable tanning and chrome tanned leather. So vegetable tan leather, they use tannins and tannic acids from like tree bark and like roots, and they grind it up, and those tannic acids take flesh and convert it into leather, which isn't gonna rot like flesh would. Vegetable tan leather, it's a little more expensive because it takes a lot longer to tan. Like chrome leather might take 2 to 3 days to tan. Vegetable tan leather can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So because of that, it's a little more expensive. It's a little more natural of a process. A lot of people really like vegetable tan leather because it's a lot more environmentally friendly, because there's no really harsh chemicals and it's all just made from natural stuff. It's also a more natural looking leather. It shows more of the grain, and it absorbs more oils and sweats more. So when you see people talking about leather taking on a patina, they're usually talking about vegetable tan leather because it's such a more natural and organic feeling leather. It kind of ages differently than say chrome tan leather. And then chrome tan leather, they use chromium salts to do the same process, taking flesh and turning it into leather. And there's basically a two-step process with chrome tan leather. There's the bluing of the leather, and then there's a retan process, which turns the blue leather into the more normal looking brown and whatever colors they retan it with. And so in the boot video with this boot, where we talked about like this blued leather, this basically means they did the chromium tanning process, and then when they went to retan it, they didn't leave it in the barrels long enough, and it didn't retan long enough to where that darker color and the retanning process didn't get all the way into the middle of the leather. It just hit the surfaces. And so that causes the leather to be a little more brittle and a little bit harder and a little more fragile. And so if you see a leather that has the bluing on the inside of the leather, it's a cheaper leather because they didn't leave it in the retanning process long enough for those oils and the retanning stuff to get into the leather. There are some advantages to chrome tan leather. It's a lot more soft and supple. It has a lot more oils and stuff worked into it, so it's more water resistant, and it's a lot cheaper because like I said, it takes 2 to 3 days to tan chrome tan leather. So if you're a leather manufacturer, you can do 10 times the amount of leather. So most of the leather goods you see out there are gonna be chrome tanned basically for that reason alone. Like some of the best leather in the world, like chromexcel, is a chrome tan leather. So it's not a bad leather, it's just a different way of doing it for different properties. Now let's talk about the quality of leather and how it's determined and where it comes from. Quality of leather is not only determined by what part of the hide it comes from, but also what cross section of the hide it comes from. There's basically two sides of the leather. There is the grain side, which is on the outside, and then there's the flesh side, which is on the inside. The flesh side is kind of like the inside of the cow, the grain side is the outside where the hair would be. And so tanneries split these into different types of cuts. And so from top down and quality down, it goes full grain, top grain, and then genuine. And this very, very top section of the hide is called the grain. And that's where you see that really, really tightly compact leather. That's called the grain. And full grain uses all of that. And full grain is a really natural looking leather. It shows all the scars and all the imperfections, and a lot of really high-end stuff is made from full grain. Next down is top grain. It's not necessarily worse than full grain. It technically doesn't have as much grain in it, but it's still a really good leather. It's used in an application where you don't want tons of texture, and you don't want tons of characteristics in the leather. And so they basically cut off the very top layer or sand off the very top layer that removes any like bug bites, any scars, any wrinkles. So you have a really clean looking leather. You're gonna have a little bit more of the fibers in there, but it's still basically just as strong and just as high quality as full grain. And then we finally get to genuine. And genuine is like the craziest marketing and smartest selling tactic I've ever seen. It's so anytime you see a genuine like belt, anytime you see a genuine leather product, if it says genuine, it's kind of a double entendre. Instead of naming it like low quality, they named it genuine so that when people stamp genuine on their belts or whatever, people think it's just a high quality product, like, ooh, this is real leather. But in all reality, it's just a marker for saying this is a low quality leather. So it's like, it's crazy. And as soon as you know that and you start seeing genuine stamped everywhere, you're like, oh, that doesn't mean real leather, that means poor quality leather. Next up is the types of finishes on leather. There's like 3 main classifications of leather finishes. There's aniline or aniline, depends on where you're from. I say aniline because I'm from Utah. Semi-aniline and finished leather. So aniline basically is a type of finish that is really translucent and shows all the natural grain and characteristics of the leather. Semi-aniline, they add a little bit of pigment, but it's still fairly translucent, so you still see some of the natural pores and some of the natural flaws in the leather. And then finished leather is that typical leather you see where it looks plasticky and they put a really heavy coat of pigment or like plastic on top of the leather to like hide some of the natural flaws. So usually aniline leather is the best quality leather and finished leather is usually the cheapest leather. And usually finished leather it comes from the splits or the genuine leather because there's no pretty grain to show. So they have to cover it up with a lot of pigment and a lot of plasticky stuff, a plasticky finish to kind of hide that it's a cheap leather. The last thing I want to talk about is kind of the way that leather is measured. A lot of people want to talk in terms of like millimeters and percentages of, or fractions of inches, but leather is measured in ounces. 2 to 3 ounce you're going to see in wallets. That's what we use in our wallets. 5, 6 ounce you're going to see that in like a leather bag or like some heavier leather products. And then all the way up to like 9, 10 ounce, you're gonna see that in belts and harnesses and stuff like that. And there's plenty of charts out there where you can see how many millimeters are in an ounce of leather, and it kind of breaks it down and you can kind of get a feel for it, but that's kind of the general gist of how leather's measured. And now finally, let's talk a little bit about how you can identify high quality leather versus low quality leather out there in the wild. So the first thing that you're gonna wanna do, and the easiest way to do this, is just ask the company what type of leather it is. Like you can call up Doc Martin and be like, hey, what type of leather do you use? And knowing the difference between top grain, full grain, genuine, you can ask them informed questions to get informed answers. So that's like the number one thing, and that's gonna get you the furthest. If say you're in the store and you don't have anyone to call and you're just looking at the characteristics of the leather, the first thing you're gonna wanna look for is like how plasticky does it feel? Does it feel like a genuine leather that's refinished and has a corrected grain and it looks like it's got a repeating pattern that they've embossed on top of it? If it's got that, 9 times out of 10, it's a terrible leather. Next thing you can look for, does it look natural? Can you see like the natural flaws in the leather? Can you see the pores? Can you see some wrinkles and some scars and just the natural way leather looks? If it doesn't look natural, it's probably a cheaper leather. The next thing you can look at is how fibrous is the back side of the leather. That's a really good indicator of the quality of leather. If it's really fibrous and there's tons of hairs kind of coming off of it, it's usually a cheaper leather and it's cut further down into the depth of the hide, versus if it's a higher quality leather, it's up higher in that cross section and it's a higher quality leather and that grain's gonna be tighter and those fibers aren't gonna be as loose and obviously like kind of furry. Another thing that people kind of tend to think, and this is soft leather equals quality leather. That isn't necessarily true, and sometimes it's actually inversed. So like this leather is really, really soft. A lot of times a cheaper leather is gonna feel softer because it's just a poor quality leather, and a nicer leather is gonna feel a little bit stiffer because it's up higher up in that cut of leather and that grain's tighter and it takes a little bit longer to break in. It's not always true, like, because you can mill and you can tumble and you can stake leather to make it softer, But for a general rule, like a stiffer leather that feels like the grain is a tighter packed leather is going to be a higher quality leather than something that's really soft and pliable and just doesn't have a whole lot of structure to it. Another thing that's just another general rule that's not always true is price usually kind of determines the quality. You know, if you're looking at a $500 pair of boots versus a $50 pair of boots, a lot of times the $500 pair of boots is going to have a lot better quality leather, and that's usually why the price is so high. Versus a $50 pair of boots is you can't even get a boot's worth of leather, high quality leather for 50 bucks. So it's going to be cheaper leather. And that pretty much wraps up the general information. You should be able to have a general basic base of information to go off of when we start talking about this, where I say, like, you can see the bluing of the leather. This is a chrome tanned leather that's 4-ounce leather, and it has a really aniline finish. You'll know what I'm talking about. And if you forget everything, you can always come back and rewatch this. If you do have a question, drop it in the comment section. And if you like this video and you want me to make more videos like this where I can help inform you guys in leather quality so you can kind of make judgment calls on leather, be sure to like and subscribe and comment, because that's the only way I can afford to do these types of videos is with your support. So do me a favor and like and subscribe. Unless you don't like the videos, then it's fine. See ya.